My name is Jody Lynn Wadalove. I'm a lawyer with the Independent Street Checks Review. I'm going to be moderating this evening's session, and I want to say, first of all, thank you again for taking the time to come out and join us this evening. This is our very first public consultation session. It's one of many that's going to be held across the province about the police practice of street checks and carding. We will have some group discussions at your tables with some discussion questions. At your table, you will find a copy of our engagement guide. You will also find a copy of the regulation itself related to street checks and carding, as well as an information sheet or a guide that was produced by the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services. So those are information tools to help further your discussion or for your information. But before we get any further into our discussions, I would like to now take this opportunity to introduce Justice Michael Tulloch. Justice Tulloch was appointed by Ontario to be the independent reviewer for this review. Previous to this, he also was the independent reviewer for the Independent Police Oversight Review, and that report was released in March of last year. By all accounts, it was well regarded and well received, and certainly is leading to some significant action in the province. So I'd like to welcome Justice Tulloch to the podium, where he'll provide some more formal remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodalyn. Good evening, everyone. My name is, as Jodalyn has indicated, is Michael Tulloch. I want to thank you for coming out to speak with me this evening about street checks, also known as carding, and the new regulation 5816, that the Government of Ontario has introduced to regulate this particular practice. I want to thank all of you that are here this evening. I know that some of you have traveled very long distances. I think your presence here is valued and very much very, very important to be included in the voices that we listen to on this particular subject. I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all of the generations of people who have taken care of this land. I echo Jodalyn's comments with respect to the importance of acknowledging these lands and the first peoples who settled on this land since time immemorial. Long before today, as we gather here, there has been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this land. And I too would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Robinson Superior Treaty territory, and that the land on which we gather is the Anishinaabe traditional territory of the Fort William First Nations. I also recognize the contributions of the Métis and Inuit and other Indigenous peoples who have made a tremendous amount of contributions to these territories, both in shaping and strengthening this community, the province, and the country as a whole. By acknowledging this traditional territory, we're recognizing and respecting the first peoples of this country. It is also the recognition of their presence and contributions both in the past and the present. This acknowledgement is key to any relationship and reconciliation on a go-forward basis. Now, by way of background, on June the 7th, 2017, I was appointed by the provincial government to lead a full and independent review of Ontario's Regulation 5816, which outlines Ontario's new rules on police street checks, a practice sometimes referred to as carding. In this capacity, I will be reviewing the content of the regulation and assessing whether police officers, chiefs of police, and police services boards are following it. I will also assess whether the regulation reflects the important goal of ensuring that police and public interactions are consistent, bias-free, and done in a way that promises public confidence and protects human rights and civil liberties. Since my appointment, I have assembled a team of experts to assist me, and we have participated in a number of consultations across the province. Today's consultations in Thunder Bay marks the first of 12 public consultations throughout the province of Ontario. I intend to draw on what I have been learning from these consultations to include in a report with recommendations on the regulation around the practice of street checks. That report will be submitted to the Government of Ontario on November the 30th, 2018, and made available to the public in the early parts of 2019. Now, as I mentioned, the focus of this review is on Regulation 5816, which came into effect on January the 1st, 2017, in which it outlines the new rules police must follow when it comes to street checks, also known as carding. A street check is when a police officer asks someone for identifying information in a particular circumstance. Now, we've provided you some handouts, the black handouts on each of your tables. They're included with an engagement guide. And these documents provide you with information on when the new rules under the regulation apply and when they do not. For instance, the regulation applies if an officer asks you to identify yourself when they're looking into suspicious activities or investigating general criminal activity in the community. By contrast, the new rules under the regulation do not apply if the officer is talking to a driver during a traffic stop pursuant to the Highway Traffic Act, arresting someone, or investigating a specific crime. The regulation also outlines what an officer must do if they ask for your identification in a situation where the new rules apply. For example, an officer must tell you that you do not have to share your identifying information and offer your receipt with certain specific information after a request for your information is made. The regulation also provides information on the storage of information that comes from street checks, mandatory training for all police officers on the new rules, and public reporting requirements. Now, with that background in mind, I want to take the opportunity this evening to hear from you. This review is an independent review. This means that I am free to critically examine how this regulation operates and look at issues of police-public interactions in the context of street checks. Meeting with you, members of the public, is a crucial part of the process. I'm grateful that you have taken the time to meet with me this afternoon, and I appreciate that speaking about some of these issues may be difficult for some people. However, it is essential that a review of this kind be as thorough as possible, and that as the independent reviewer, I consider all relevant information from a variety of perspectives. I can assure you that I will, so long as you participate and offer me your perspective. So again, I thank you for coming out tonight to share your thoughts, experiences, and your recommendations. And I assure you that in this process, we're going to be listening to you, and we will be reflecting your perspectives and your views you will definitely be heard. Thanks very much.
Good evening, everyone. There's just a little bit of a technical issue here, so there might be a little bit of delay on this presentation. I'm just here to go over really quickly what this evening will be about, just outline the process, and then we're going to get started. Before I get started, let me just say, sachez, for those of you who would like to listen to the proceedings in French, sachez qu'un service d'interprétation vers le français est disponible. Veuillez vous munir d'écouteurs que vous trouverez à l'arrière de la salle si vous souhaitez écouter en français. Merci. So again, welcome to our consultation. And I'm not going to go over this because Justice Tulloch just outlined the mandate of the review. And as he mentioned, we're going to be traveling to various cities across the province, 12 public meetings in total. And the meetings will be set up structured just like this. So the goal of today's meeting is to hear your thoughts. And so there's paper on your tables to help guide the conversations that you're going to have. And some of the questions that you'll see are around, us trying to understand, is the practice still going on? What's your experience been? What's the impact of carding on communities? And what's the impact and the effect of the new regulation? Just as a disclaimer, the review does not include reviewing individual cases. So if you have had an individual experience with a police officer, that's not for us to review or resolve, but we do want to hear those cases for sure because it does inform the work that we're doing. And so how this works is we start off with the introduction, which is this. We're going to go right into the roundtable discussions. You'll see some of us sitting at the tables with you. So my name is Danielle. Hillary, she's also on our team. Jody Lynn, Justice Tulloch, Prasna at the back of the room. And if you see us sitting down or listening, it's just because we want to hear what the conversations are, but by all means, don't stop just because we're there. And then once we're done, we're just going to do a quick report back. And we want to hear the questions that you answered and the discussions that you had, and we'll be up here taking notes on your feedback. We are also on social media right now. This is on Facebook Live, live streaming. So if you know anybody that wasn't able to make it, they can always watch it there. We're also going to be live tweeting or semi-live tweeting the discussion today. If you, and I should have said this before, so there are cameras here and we're going to be taking pictures as well. If you don't want your photo taken, it's not an issue. If you could just let us know. Sorry, I forgot to introduce Peter Rehack. So you'll see Peter is already taking photos. If you don't want your photo taken, just let him know and he'll delete it. If you see any of us taking photos, it's because we're tweeting and we're posting on social media. But we don't want to invade anyone's privacy that doesn't want to be photographed. So just let us know, and it's not an issue at all. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, and we wish you a fruitful discussion.
So if I may offer some practical advice. So you're in your groups at your table, you have your discussion questions. You certainly aren't limited to them. You don't have to work in order. It's just something to help guide your discussions. I would also encourage you to appoint a person or maybe two if you want to share the responsibility, but someone who at the end of the 45 minutes is going to get up and report back to the larger group at the end of your discussion. So that person so as the discussion's going, they're either making their notes or formulating it in their head of what they're going to share back with the larger group. Also, if you're more comfortable and you want to provide some comments in writing, we will accept that as well. There's paper there, or you can write it on the questions. Certainly you can hand that to any member of our team and we'll take your written comments as well. So hopefully that will help you get started practically. Again, You don't have to stick to the discussion questions, but those are some of the issues that we would like your thoughts and feedback on. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get started, and we're going to work from this table here. I'm biased because I actually sat at this table for some time. So we'll begin with this table here for the first report back. There's a portable mic right there. Yeah.
Okay, so some of our recommendations were that uniform statistics be kept. So what I mean by that is that timeline to them, is that, you know, forever and a day, or is that 5 years? What does that look like for the information that's been collected?
Okay, can I just get you to stop? I know we want to carry on the table discussions, but out of respect for the person speaking, can we just keep the talk to a minimum? And I'm sorry. So the first recommendation from the group was uniform reporting statistics, right?
Yeah, and timeline to that. So is that forever? Is that 5 years? What is
Okay.
the procedures in that? Our other one was having a data management and uniform way that is collected and stored.
Okay.
And education. So education based on community level of carding, and education all the way top up, ground up.
Okay. Anything else from the group?
We had
Nope.
a lot more, but that's all.
Okay. We're going to move further along to the next table.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I think we felt that the new regulation hasn't been widely publicized, and within our group, we felt a certain level of mistrust or cynicism that even though the regulation sounds good, that it would be respected and followed by everyone. We felt there were benefits to police stops if the situation warrants it. But that the reason, it's very important that the reason for the stop be given. We felt that the police need to acknowledge and recognize that certain sectors, such as visible minority, Indigenous people, will assume that they've been stopped because of their color, and that the police need to be aware of this and kind of acknowledge it to themselves. A question that we had was, if someone is stopped and questioned by the police but not asked for their ID, is this actually carding?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if,
The question was what? I'm sorry.
So clarification about the stop, whether it's carding or not.
yes, I mean, example, somebody's parked at the LCBO and a police officer comes over and starts asking them, have you been drinking? Have you been drinking in the last 12 hours? Doesn't ask them for their specific identification, but quite intrusive questions.
Right, so the issue is, you know, the collection of identifying information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that information is what gets repository, right?
Right.
And that's what it adversely affects someone. But, you know, the police should be able to still engage with people within the community to ensure that there is public safety. Sorry. What I was saying was, we still want the police to engage with communities, and they have a public safety function within their duties as police officers. The issue really is if the identifying information is being collected and stored in some kind of a database without any justifiable reason.
Okay, moving on to training. We felt that there's a big difference in police officers today in this community, for sure, in terms often having to do with age, that younger officers have had different training and are often more empathetic and understanding, and it's sometimes older officers who are more hardline about things. We acknowledge or realize that training isn't always immediately effective. Sometimes it needs to happen a number of times before it really takes effect. We thought the questions about data were important. How it's used and how it's stored, and if there's a time when it needs to be deleted in terms of starting over. We feel that the accountability in terms of recording things would be important. It would be very important that the demographics indicate those demographics where we assume that there may be a bias. We also wondered whether it would be easy for officers to, like if they didn't agree with the system, if they don't give out receipts, then what would there be to report on? I guess if they don't collect the information. So again, we were a little cynical about whether the reports would be an accurate reflection. And training, that's the one big important thing that I forgot. In terms of training, we think that the police themselves should be doing some of this training, and that if they were to be doing it hand in hand with community groups and groups that are well trusted, that this could be very beneficial for the community as a whole. That if just the community groups do it, it doesn't go very far to alleviate mistrust or distrust in the police. If just the police do it, they may not be heard sort of saying, oh, well, that's just what they're supposed to do, but that's not going to be what they really do. But if the two groups can work together in informing all community members about the changes, that this could be most effective.
Is there anything else? Oh, okay.
I just wanted to reiterate and I think emphasize the two aspects of training and education for police officers around these regulations. The thing about training is with police services, because a number of us have worked with police, the time that is allotted to police training is very little, really. So you don't really, I don't think they don't get in-depth training or really to grasp the seriousness and importance of this, these kinds of regulations. And so I would say they might get surface training because they're to put a whole police services through training in their allotted training time, training resources that they have is very, very limited, I think. The other thing around education, that, and Brenda touched on this, was some time ago we used to have community policing. We had neighborhood policing. And in terms of the police themselves being involved, because I think education for the broader community needs to be prolonged so that your average citizen knows what this is all about, what their rights are, what the responsibilities of police are. So that's going to take a while for the broader community to understand their rights and the responsibilities of police. But I think police were involved. Like, we still do have police that work on the streets, that walk down the streets, if they were involved in talking to citizens on the street, the message that would go out to the community is that an officer is saying, here's what's here's what this is all about, and here's what your rights are, and here's what you can ask for. I think that would go a long way. So I just wanted to reiterate the training and the education and how it plays out. And it has to be prolonged so that your broader community will know what this is.
I'm just going to pull my thoughts together here. I think one of the things that our table discussed was the receipts that are given. And if somebody is stopped, and there needs to be a reason why they were stopped, I think. Sort of what we had discussed. I've never heard of a receipt being given for somebody who's been stopped and asked for their name or ID. So the first thought I had was it was an incident card that was given with an incident number, but apparently it's not. And they don't have to be given a reason why they've been stopped. And I think that needs to be standard across the board. The other thing we chatted a bit about, and I think the only organization in Thunder Bay that does it is the Know Your Rights card. Through Anishinaabe Aski Nation Legal Services Corporation. They've been doing that for a few years now, if I remember correctly. Yep. A few years. They're going to be updating those cards. And again, it's really vital that those cards are getting in the hands of the students and the young people that need them. So again, sharing that information across the board. I think Thunder Bay's been good for sharing that information between places like Matawa, which is connected to NAN, but we need to broaden that because we are representing Treaty 3 and Robinson Superior, and I think we need to broaden that kind of understanding and language for young people across Thunder Bay. The other thing, and sort of I was thinking about it, as the other table was talking about some of these things, is one of the things we're doing in a friendship agreement with Thunder Bay Police is trying to build community relations with police officers. Because again, if we look at historically, an officer in a uniform represents so much. If we look at First Nations history and how that uniform is already a sign that there's a division between your community and the officer. And so again, that was another bit of a conversation that we had at the table. Does that sum it up? And we have one more comment. So again, we talked a bit about advertising stats and promoting it, educating the public.
So statistics by police or statistics by community?
By police.
By police, okay. About what?
What it is they're doing. I'm going to turn it over.
Okay.
No, we talked about advertising as a means of accountability and just sharing the training that's going on, sharing the stats that are going on, and just so that people know about it as a means to promote the accountability and the service to the community.
Okay.
That was there. One of the other things, the peripheral issue was about carding and how that leads to incarcerations because of people that have been breached, that have had breaches on their conditions of release, knowing that sometimes those conditions, if they're down from a northern community to a medical appointment, and that's why they've left the community. So sometimes the situations can be very complicated.
Okay. Anything else from the group? No? Okay. Moving on to this next.
During our discussions, we also were talking about the receipt as well. We got it confused with an incident receipt, a carding receipt that you've been carded. And if it's anything like an incident receipt, those are just basic, thin little pieces of paper. I guess I don't know what a carding receipt looks like. If it is like the incident receipt where it's just basic, maybe that actual little piece of paper can have information on the back and what you can do with it, or information on database, or something that just corresponds with the information they're collecting, and what just some information on the back of it perhaps would be a little more helpful. And if it's not a thin piece of paper, maybe it's going to be a little bit thicker, because if you're giving this to youth or younger people, that can easily be just lost and they don't care. Maybe people won't care about it, but that could be a bit helpful. We also discussed international students and that when they get carded, that they just use that as an excuse to card them, and then that brings up the discussion of immigration, and their rights are questionable in that they can't get legal aid. That comes into play. How do they handle immigration when they're doing carding? Was another thing that we discussed. We did discuss that public awareness and information on that would be beneficial. In terms of collecting data and who should be able to access it, definitely this committee, special investigation units were a few that we mentioned, and that yes, it should be the police services should store this information. We said yes, and also just because it can prove racism and biasness, so that it can show that they do need more training in that area. And that's about all that we had to say. For number 19, I guess, what should be reported to the public, the amount of checks are done and why they were done, would be a good piece of information to share, because then that information could be used with other organizations. So anybody, do you want to?
Last table?
Last table, but not least.
Nope, certainly not least.
Thank you. So we had some really great conversation at our table. One of our participants had to leave. So a lot of our thoughts were already shared by the other tables. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. So the need for more education, of course, was mentioned at a couple of tables. Education for police, of course, around the regulation, but also we felt for citizens to better understand the regulation, and also to understand what their rights are in terms of when they can decline a request for information by police. I think that's really important. We talked about the fact that within the regulations, we didn't see anywhere stated what the penalty may be for a police officer or police service who did not follow the regulation, and so that may be elsewhere in the Police Services Act, but it wasn't connected back to the Act, so I don't know exactly what the penalty would be, and I think that's important to know, and perhaps in some way be included. What else did I want to say? I wanted to mention also, Brenda, at this table, I liked your comment about the importance of police officers understanding that there may be certain groups of individuals who are going to assume that they're being carded or they're being targeted because they belong to a certain demographic. And I think that that understanding that some groups may have an intrinsic distrust for police because of historic reasons. I think that's really important. So I think we need to focus on more education around anti-oppression, anti-racism, intergenerational trauma, the impacts of that, and understand why there are certain levels of distrust. Someone mentioned at our table that there was a recent CBC story that Ottawa released a report over the last year, the number of police record checks that they had made. And I think someone said that it was 7 over the last year. And it was sort of, our table was surprised, really only 7 for a large community like that. And so I think there has to be a lot of education around what actually constitutes a check, as opposed to a police officer just approaching an individual on the street or being stopped and asking for information. So what the difference is. I actually spent quite a bit of time going through the regulation myself, and I found that there were some sections that were quite confusing. So I believe that, I understand it's legalese and it can be complicated, but I believe that it's going to take a lot of education. And the fact that it's been in effect for a year, and there were people at our table who hadn't heard of it, weren't aware of it, and may have been subject to a check but weren't aware of that, I think that's a little problematic. And then finally, with respect to the receipt, there was someone at our table who had been stopped, and the police officer offered her a card, and it looked like a business card. And so she didn't know if that was a receipt or if it was a business card out of courtesy. Like, here's my information if you need to reach me, if you have any questions. And it wasn't a check, like it wasn't a carding incident, but she wasn't clear on that. So I understand there isn't consistency in terms of what the receipt looks like across the board, and I think that should be considered so that it's very clear what this looks like and what people are receiving. Anything else to add? John? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback. Again, if you feel that there's some comments or points made either by yourself or your colleagues or anyone that you know, feel free to contact us. We are online. We have a website where you can fill out the information. There is a area on our website where you can type the information directly. You can send it to us by email or mail it to us. All of our contact information is there. Thank you very much again for taking the time to come out. We really do value your input, and please do spread the word about our review, and we look forward to meeting and hearing from you. Again, we all have make sure you signed our contact information. We want to make sure we have all of your information there so that we can provide you with the link to the report when that is finished. But thank you very much. Safe travels and have a good evening. Thank you. You want to say something?
Okay, I just want to thank you guys for coming out. Hello. Okay, thank you so much for coming out and participating in this process. What I can say to you is that a lot of your comments are comments that we've heard from other groups as well as from the police and stakeholders themselves. I think that there needs to be a greater amount of public education, as well as education within the policing community, education and training. I think that there needs to be greater consistency. That's another common theme across the board as to the application of these particular regulations. For example, the actual receipts and what they look like. and just, you know, a larger amount of understanding on the part of the public as to what the role of police officers are within the context of public safety and police engagement, and the understanding of individual liberties and the rights of citizens. So again, thanks so much to all of you for your contributions. Great.